go. And we're live, so thank you for anyone who's tuning in live today, and for anyone who's watching this after the fact. That's good. Information is still valid. I'm here today with two of my colleagues, Ryan Proulx and Lutz from Safe, obviously. Ryan, what's your position at Safe, your official job title? Because I'm never sure.
I think right now I'm one of the technical directors of the FME Engine product, but I also lead one of the 8 teams that comprise the development staff for FME Engine as well.
Okay. I'm thinking you've been at Safe for longer than I have, I think. Well, it must be pretty close.
I think it's 20 plus years now. So
oh, well, there you go. That's definitely more than me. So yeah, so Ryan definitely knows. I mean, I think he's probably my go-to man for a lot of questions regarding FME. A lot of in-depth knowledge there, and Dale. I mean, obviously co-founder. I think probably most people watching will know who you are anyway. So
yeah. Okay, so I'm Dale Lutz. I'm one of the 2 co-founders and been around 28 years. And we're so old, Mark and Ryan. We're so old that we were around before there was Unicode. So please have sympathy for FME as we've been on a Unicode journey, and we're going to talk a lot about internationalization today. But that's been a huge project. I'm proud of what the team has done, and it was not easy, but we've been on that journey for actually many, many years, and it feels good to be getting to the light at the absolute end of the tunnel, and excited to hear what Ryan's going to share with us today.
Yeah. So Ryan, you were going to look at encoding and internationalization. So why is this important? That's a good place to start, perhaps. And
yeah, that's a great question, Mark. So I mean, my first volley would be to say that all data is encoded. So if you're thinking about string data, you may know the encoding. You may know it's in UTF8 or that it's in Japanese shift-JIS or in Windows Latin 1 or something like that. But you also may not know, and your data may not know its own encoding either. So whether you know it or your data knows it or not, it definitely is encoded. And so it's a problem that is kind of ubiquitous and everywhere when we're dealing with strings and basically any sort of text. And so these days, we find that we're dealing with more global problems and data from different countries around the world. And so it's coming to us in different languages and different encodings, and we're helping more enterprise organizations that are thinking globally and dealing with this types of international data. And our previous sort of position where you only deal with data that came from your own area or your own region is pretty obsolete now. And so we're making some strides to allow better international support for data from across the world.
Yeah. And that seems to be, well, I think, and you can tell me, not just the data as in the values in there, but also the names of the attributes and things like that as well. I've noticed that can often be encoded as well.
Yeah, actually an interesting piece of that is that first let me talk about the sources of encoding. So sometimes you think that your data is really about just what is stored in my tab file or my shape file or my CSV file or something like that. But the encoding that we're using is actually a combination of various places. It can be the data that is coming from, it can be the workspace and how it's stored, because the names that you mentioned are actually stored within the workspace as part of the schema for the data. It can also be the operating system and the locale that you're setting on that. So if I have an English US locale or something like that, it's going to imply an encoding of Windows Latin 1. Or if I have a Japanese locale, it's going to imply probably shift-JIS as the encoding. And so that's also one of the things that dictates our encoding. And as well, the application itself. So FME itself has its own encoding. Right now, in the past, prior to FME 2022.0, it was using the same locale as the system, as the operating system.
Okay.
But that is not always true, especially if I try and take some Japanese data and process it on my Windows Latin 1 or English US machine on Windows. That's not going to work out very well. So the sources of encoding is definitely a problem, and sort of breaking this assumption that all of these are the same in all cases is really the challenge that we have.
Gotcha.
So to the names and values, it's actually quite interesting. I can show you a demo of how this has changed from older FME to newer FME. But the gist of it is that we historically we've done a fairly good job with values for attributes. where we're able to understand and preserve the encoding there. It's names where we've had a lot of trouble before. But the interesting part about that, if I were to show you something like this sample CSV file, it's a little small here.
Yeah.
Gotta get the glasses on.
Yeah. But this is a one-line CSV file.
Okay. Is that Chinese or Japanese or something?
It's Japanese. This
Japanese,
first
okay.
set is Japanese, and the second set is actually a mixture of different encodings with some Cyrillic, some Japanese, and some Arabic in there as well. So, but the point is that this first line is like a header line, so it's the names, and the second line is the value line. And what might we expect this to happen with this? So if I take my Workbench 2021 on the left and 2022 on the right, we can take a look at what would happen if we were to generate this. If I were to generate this on the left-hand side, what happens is that the names end up being garbled because I happen to be running on a Windows Latin 1 machine. The values, as we see in the preview, are actually correct. They match the data as expected, but the names were misinterpreted as Windows Latin 1.
Ryan, can you zoom in on that CSV?
Oh, that's going to be interesting.
Like not the values, but the, like just if you just do a Workbench zoom on the top guy. Yeah, just zoom that in.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, sure. We can zoom in on this. This shows how the data is mangled here.
Yeah.
And so this is really a misinterpretation of the bytes is what's happening here.
Yeah.
So these are still the bytes that we saw in Notepad that were supposed to be, in this case, UTF8, but the name got mangled and we misinterpreted those bytes. And yet we were still able to read the data. And so this might have been a passable result in terms of preserving the data values. But really, it came from the same file. The same file contained the names and the values both in UTF-8, and we only did the right thing with the values. So this is historically where we're coming from. If we treat this differently in modern or FME 2022, really what we see here is we are able to generate, and when we run this, we can see that both the names and the values are preserving the same value, which is what we had intended there. And it's not just the Japanese values that were in this one. This is, I believe, surface or table. And this
fantastic.
Which is actually interesting because it's in encoding speak, this is called Damemoji, where there are embedded nulls within the bytes used to represent this character, which means it often breaks other encodings. And so this is even a tricky one to deal with, but we're able to do that in these first two columns. And this third column is even more interesting, as we noted, because it contains multiple types of encoding in both the name and the value, and now we're able to read it correctly in FME 22.0.
Would this be like a Heinz 57 kind of file? Is that the right terminology?
Yes. It definitely is a mixture of many things, yes. But it's a very simple case, but it represents the situations we might have where we're dealing with encoded data that are in files that contain names and values, which previously would have given us trouble.
Best to prepare for the worst case, I guess, and then...
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's interesting, how are we accomplishing this is one kind of interesting question, right? We didn't go through 10 million lines of stuff in FME and change all of our strings encodings. What we did is when we talked about those different sources of encoding with the data file and the operating system and the workspace and FME, what we did was we changed FME itself to say, I'm not going to align myself with the encoding of the operating system anymore. I'm going to use UTF-8 where possible.
Okay.
And that sort of is the key to getting good support, and especially support across different encodings like this example here.
Okay, that's cool. So what would happen if somebody had an older workspace that they opened in 2022? So it wasn't in UTF-8 before. And I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here on what you're about to say, but...
no, that's a great question.
It was the obvious one that occurred to me, yeah. So
absolutely, yeah. And so we try to allow the source data to be in any encoding now, and we try to track inside of the workspace what the encoding is. If I were to open one of the workspace I was just looking at, you would see a new keyword that kind of says I was generated on a system that was UTF-8, because in the 2022 version, in the 2021.0 version, it would have said I've been generated with Windows Latin 1. And so it now knows which it is. And that knowledge of, what we were generated with allows us to try to at least be compatible with existing workspaces. We're not always successful. There are some edge cases, especially if your names did not actually map to reasonable bytes in a new encoding. So if those bytes aren't valid, there's really not much we can do with the names. But a good measure would be to say, if it worked before in 2021, it's likely that we could have that workspace work again in 2022. The more
Fantastic.
mangled your names are, the less likely that case is going to be successful, though.
For sure.
But I can illustrate that fairly clearly, I think.
Great.
So this is the similar kind of data set that we looked at in CSV, but this time it's in shape. You know, shapefile has that 10-character name limit, so it is mangling the names in a similar way, except that they're a little bit shorter, so they got cut off. But again, the values were okay. And this was generated here in 2021. But if I were to take that same workspace, I have to close it here. And then I was going to open that shape workspace again in 2022. I even though the names are mangled here, I can actually still run it and get successful values out. So this is an example where we knew the generation encoding of the workspace, and we were able to say, even though in 22.0 we're working with UTF8, we can understand, yes, it was originally in Latin 1. Let's mangle the names so that they match and get the data values out successfully. So this would be what the successful case would look like for hopefully most workspaces that people have had prior to 22.0.
I'll just throw in, it goes back an extremely long time because I remember it being written on the whiteboard in my old office that we've been storing the actual workspaces using UTF-8 for a very, very long time. And that was because FME Cloud is always in Unicode. And so if you authored on a desktop and pumped it up there, it would all be okay. So our infrastructure was ready for the glorious day, but there was pieces that just weren't there. And great work, Ryan and team, to keep the same behavior, even though it was kind of gibbled, as we might say. At least it still keeps working. And that's actually going to mean that it would work the same on FME Cloud as here, as on a Mac, as anywhere. But what else can you tell us? And actually, Mark, the question I was going to ask Ryan at this, when he described what was going on, I was going to say, what could possibly go wrong?
Let me get to what can go wrong in just a moment here. But one more point that I'll add to that is that if you are now generating workspaces in FME 22.0, the chances that you are going to be able to be compatible, like Dale mentioned, across the FME platform, publishing from desktop to server or cloud, moving from one platform to another. So if you want to share your authored workspace on Mac or Linux or Windows, or if you just want to change your locale and still have this work correctly, all of those cases should now work successfully in FME 2022.0. If we are able to if we are able to change the application FME's own encoding to UTF-8, that's really the key. And unfortunately, there are, as Dale noted, some limitations where we're not able to do that. There are situations where older Windows versions are unable to allow us as an application to change the locale to UTF-8. So it requires a modern Windows version. Historically, Linux and Mac OS have used UTF-8 anyway as their default locale encoding, and so that isn't a problem on those systems. But on Windows, there's a version issue there. So, and that applies to Windows Server as well. There are details in our previous webinar, and there'll be more details in some articles that are published around internationalization to let you know exactly what those versions are. But there are some limitations. So we will certainly attempt to use this new UTF-8 encoding. If we cannot, we simply will revert to the old behavior that we used to have. And so it would be like you're running the older workspace and you will get the same sort of name mangling potentially, but basically compatibility with what you had before.
Cool.
And I hate to kind of throw this in here, Ryan, and maybe you're going to get to it, but isn't there's also some minefields if you use certain Python libraries that monkey around with the locale on you. So we've tried to mitigate that, but I think there may be, depending on, and we're going to work with customers as they maybe stumble on these minefields and figure out what we can do, but there are some ill-behaved Python libraries out there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, if you're just a regular user of FME and you don't dabble in Python, or you're not trying to use our SDKs to sort of embed FME into your own application or anything, then your world is much simpler, and most of the time you're going to be okay. But if you are sort of doing a bit more of that programming aspect of things, there are calls within those languages, whether it's Python or the other APIs, where you can change the locale. Now, if we're trying to change the locale for FME to UTF-8, and you're setting the time function or something like that in Python is going to go change the locale to your operating system locale, that's going to cause an issue for us. So the best thing that we try to do here, there's kind of two cases. One of them is that we will either let you, make your simple time call or something like that, and it'll change the locale, and then we will detect that and say, oh no, that's okay, great, you made your time call, it's done. Let's just set it back to UTF-8 now and carry on like nothing happened. So that's the successful case, and hopefully that shouldn't be noticed by users, and it should just work.
That's impressive. Yeah, that you can do that.
Yes. The detection part is the tricky part, and we've tried to do that balance, the performance of checking too often with, making sure that we're checking enough to detect the cases. But the second case that's interesting is when we do something like import ArcPy or something along those lines, where it kind of assumes that most of its processing is in the operating system locale encoding. And so in those cases, we have a few cases where we simply will give up and say, okay, we're not going to run in UTF-8. We're just going to go back to the old behavior and make sure we're compatible. So there is some trickiness, and you might bump into some of these cases if you're running the old, but particularly ArcPy type things or importing things in Python. There are some gotchas there. I'll note that one workaround that will save you in this case, if you're running on Windows and you're importing these things and you really do want, or your library really wants the operating system locale, you can still use the old Windows beta UTF-8 locale to work around this, because then you're forcing both the Python library and FME to work in UTF-8, and then they're in sync and everything is fine.
Ryan and I have worked together so long, I was going to ask him or set him up for exactly that, and he spiked it before I got it.
Beat you to punch there. Yeah.
The interesting case about that, I think, is that generally you shouldn't need to do this. We used to recommend setting this Windows beta locale to UTF-8 in the past, and really in most of these workspaces where you're not encountering these types of Python import issues or things like that, it really shouldn't be necessary, because the operating system locale encoding is now mostly irrelevant to what FME is doing if it's able to set its own application encoding to UTF-8. So we're kind of just ignoring the operating system encoding for the most part now.
We should even add that we read Microsoft kind of advice that suggested that what we are now doing is kind of what they recommend people do in modern applications.
Fantastic.
So we're not kind of going rogue here, but we are using fairly new tech that came out not that long ago.
Yeah. So one of the questions you might be wondering is, well, if FME sometimes sets the UTF-8 encoding for the application and sometimes doesn't, how do I know whether it does or not, right?
Yeah, do we log any of that information?
And you are right, Mark. If I look at this example here, and I scroll up, there is this nice little section in here that talks about both the locale of your system, which in this case is English US. It's probably pretty tiny
fantastic. Here. It is a bit small, but
can you pump it up?
Can I increase the size of this?
You can, yes, if you go to the settings.
The gear
you have
over
to go
there?
up a bit to the right. There you go. And log font at the top. I think on the right hand side you've got the
there we
points.
go. So we can make this is
we can make it properly pumped up.
That's what I always do when I'm presenting. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. That was very helpful. There's some presenter expertise there that Mark has. But so the locale is actually English US, which is, we know I'm still running on Windows Latin 1 kind of machine, but we note that the system encoding used by the process is now UTF-8, and so in this case we actually are in the successful case. If I were to run that workspace again in the old one, I'm not even sure the logging will occur in this case, but if it does, it certainly will tell us that we weren't in the expected.
I saw 1252 go past, so
yes, it is 1252, and I'd have to change it on this older version as well to bump this up. But so you can see that this one interpreted the FME was still using Windows 1252 or Windows Latin 1 in this case instead of UTF-8. So that's really the difference illustrated in the log file.
Ryan, how long have we been logging that?
These have been logged for a number of years already, several past releases for sure. It's just that the value is now significantly changed.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. One other thing about the log that might be interesting is that even though you might have lots of interesting characters and things go by, the log itself, similar to the workspaces, has been UTF-8 for a couple of releases now at least. And so we should be able to always believe hopefully the log and what it's saying and the characters that within it should be preserved as much as possible.
Yeah.
Now, if you start with garbage, you'll get garbage, but
Yeah.
if you started with something that was interesting and complex, you should have that preserved in the log file. So you should at least be able to trust the log.
That's good.
Awesome.
And I guess one of the things that people have got to be careful of is if they add a reader that's got a encoding setting, they need to make sure that's correct, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
'Cause
And that's part of the recourse that we've given users for readers, and that's not necessarily new. But it is something worth noting that if we do have interesting data
Yes.
that we're pulling in, like this MIF file, for example, there's often a character encoding that's being set here, and in some cases, the format can know it's encoding, like MIF does.
Okay.
Whereas CSV doesn't really, for example.
Yeah.
And we could override this. It's really an override to say, I really know it's something different. But most of the time, detecting the source should be sufficient. And then you're able to, pick out all your fun Japanese characters here. This is actually a set of the soil samples from near Osaka in Japan. And it's another example of how, on this system, I can read the names and the values correctly.
Awesome.
Superb. Yeah, I got into a discussion with Ken Bragg on Twitter about what the default should be, whether it should default to UTF-8 reading or not. And I said it probably shouldn't, and then I started using it, and I'm like, it was annoying to read CSV and then have to go back and change it. And
this is one of those, I think, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah. Exactly.
But Ryan, we should mention I know that there's at least half the audience out there that's a huge shapefile fan. The shapefile fans out there, and they don't worry, shapefile fans. There's a special companion sidecar file called the CPG that would set the code page for you.
This is
shapefile
true.
users, not necessarily shapefile fans, I think we perhaps should say.
Yeah, so actually in shapefile is a very interesting thing if we segue a little bit, but a lot of formats have their own way of storing encoding, and the CPG in this case knows that it's stored in UTF-8. It's storing the code page, which is actually what CP stands for. It's also possible, this will be a bad example if I open up the binary DBF file, but within there's also a language identifier that can be used, but it's a smaller set and doesn't contain UTF-8. And so
it's as old as I am.
It is part of the original spec for DBF there, right? So, yeah, but in general, yes, shapefiles should be able to know the encoding that is stored in.
Modern ones, and if they don't have the CPG, then you can override it in the settings.
That's correct.
What I've noticed, interestingly, for a few years ago, is that all shapefiles made by QGIS, and I'm open to fact checking here, but at least I experienced that a few years ago, all had UTF-8. So the QGIS folks just said, too bad, we're only making UTF-8 shapefiles. And then that just solved, I think, a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
Right. I think that the issue is more pronounced potentially in CSV as well, because it doesn't know it's encoding.
Yeah.
And so CSV has the other sort of trick to it, where it's able to store a BOM or a byte order marker along with the file. And that sort of is a few bytes that you don't usually see visibly at the beginning of the file here that actually indicate that it is in UTF-8. And so we generally do this by default when we're creating CSV files, just to make sure the encoding is known. And that's sort of the goal of what we would want to be able to do, is know the encoding as much as possible for our data without having to guess or without having to override it.
Absolutely.
We've lost Mark's webcam.
Oh, you have? Oh, what happened there?
You've unplugged it.
I've unplugged it? How did I do that?
I don't know if it's true, but Ryan and I can keep it going. Are we really broadcasting live, Mark?
We are, yes. I actually have a question from a user on the live feed. Oh, it turned the camera off again. Well, I'm frozen now.
The technical issues of the live feed.
Well, I'm playing with a new camera setup I've got. I borrowed a camera and was using it. But anyway,
it's out of battery.
It shouldn't. And I hadn't pulled on the cable. Anyway, while I'm sorting this, you perhaps answer the question, which was this an addition or a change that we made that users were asking for, or did we just say, hey, wouldn't it be good if we did UTF-8?
Do you want to field that, Dale?
I can take a crack, and then Ryan can fact check me. But we definitely have had long-time users that need to work with data that isn't from the country that their computer is set on. So yes, it was a long time request that we were working towards in a variety of ways. This project actually spanned, Ryan, was it at least a year and a half or maybe more?
I'm going to say it's almost 3 years now.
3. Yeah, you're right. We were working on this in the office together before the pandemic. So this was a massive effort for us, a re-engineering effort, and we wouldn't have undertaken it without the need. And of course, in general, supporting Unicode better helps us everywhere. But specifically, there are more and more customers that truly do work with data from different countries and need to be working with it.
For sure.
So I'll point to maybe the benefits and what we're talking about. So one of the things that we talked about was portable workspaces, whether you have different across different applications in the FME platform, different operating system platforms, and also different locales. It avoids sort of misinterpreting of your characters, and so the garbled name sort of situation goes away when we're successfully able to use UTF8. And also we are becoming more strict. So if you do have data that isn't actually the bytes don't actually make sense in your current encoding, we are now detecting that more strictly and erroring, giving you a chance to reinterpret the data correctly if things are tagged incorrectly. And again, the workspace compatibility that we talked about from older FME to newer FME, and certainly the newer workspaces being as compatible as we can imagine they can be. And lastly, the interesting side effect of this is that historically we would have had to do what was called transcoding, which is switching from one encoding to another. But the cost of transcoding is generally high. And if we had to do that at different places, from transformer to transformer or from reader to writer along the way in the process in order to do manipulation of the strings, this could get expensive. And so now that we have like a harmonized everything is in UTF8, there actually is a lot less transcoding potentially depending on what you were doing in your workspace. And you might actually see improved runtimes and reduced sort of time for your translations to complete. So those are all kind of the benefits, but we definitely took stock at the beginning of this project and had dozens of issues where people had, it's one of those things that people don't call it, hey, please make this UTF-8, but it's the situation where they did have data that was in a different encoding than what they had on their system and had issues reading it and it being mangled. Some of the cases that was not readable at all, like in those damn emoji cases where there were embedded nulls, it simply was not readable. You could not get the data that you wanted. But in the better cases, you actually had mangled names, and now you have neither of those, and hopefully happiness with your data.
Fantastic. And this is already in the beta for 2022, I'm assuming?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the one I was running there was just a recent beta here on FME 2022.0.
Yeah, it's probably been live since, November sometime, Ryan?
Yeah, depending which aspects you talk about. I mean, obviously we've been trying to test our best in different scenarios and work through a bunch of the defects, but I think we're pretty happy with how things have come out. And I think, this has probably been working well for the last few months at least.
Yes. And we've done test suite runs where we make sure we work with paths we make the temp directory have challenging characters, shall we say, and we've scraped our knuckles a few times, but we've lived to fight another day.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting discussion about paths. As Mark sort of noted, it was names where we really focused on for the project. Values had existed and known their encodings, and it was happy. Names now are hopefully UTF-8 in the new world, or they're the compatible encoding that they used to be for older workspaces. But also paths are an interesting case where it might have looked like you were able to, on your operating system, see a path that existed, for example, in this compatibility. Oops, is it this one? No, the other case. The cross-encoded data, where you can see the path has encoded characters in it. But if I were to go and try and load this into the older FME, this is a case that simply doesn't work. It doesn't know how to interpret the path. So the file names and paths can also be an issue. And although that wasn't the focus of the project, a lot of these cases have been resolved. I'm still not sure I would recommend, installing your FME into a path that has encoded characters that are not the same as your locale or aren't supported by your locale. But you can still take some risks by doing that. But in general, there are definitely improvements in this area around paths. And
Ryan, this is sort of a humorous thing, but I think all those funny emoji characters would now work as well in everything.
Oh, really?
And so, Mark, I think we should be able to read a chocolate ice cream separated file.
Ah, excellent. Oh, wow, that would be pretty incredible. Smiley faces.
I remember trying to get that work years ago, but I have not tried that. But folks at home, if you want to make your own PSV, as it was called, you can do that.
That is going to
it's
be my
interesting.
test for the afternoon. I'm going to try that one.
Really, emojis are just another encoding for string data, really. And so, yeah, absolutely. Some of the people on the project team for, internationalization that we've worked on in the past few years really have experimented with some very interesting character sets, including emojis. And if that's useful to you, it is a possibility.
It would delight me to see some smiley faces in those feature type names.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, I think we probably. I'm just looking at some of the comments, and we're getting lots of smiley emojis in the chat. So that's.
We must have thousands of people watching today.
Oh. Well, we've got at least one. So we'll say hello to Ite out in the Netherlands. I know he's watching us, and
do we say follow? Do we say follow and subscribe? Is that what our line is?
I think that's it. Yes. Hit the like, but that's it. Like, subscribe, follow, and whatever. Yes, some people might be on YouTube chatting as well, but I can't keep track of too many platforms at once. But,
well, I know that anybody tuning in is going to have. They're absolutely going to be the life of the first post-COVID party they attend when they bring this topic up.
Well, was there anything else that you've been working on that you want to share, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. If you'll give me a forum, I'll definitely talk about a few other things.
Well, I mean, I know I reserved your time and said, well, 10, 15 minutes and you'll be good, but we're already past 30 minutes. So.
The only thing that I would add is that, one of the other features in addition to internationalization that we are really excited about for FME 2022.0 was performance. Really, we made some huge strides and based on some infrastructure investments and specific transformers and formats where we tried to improve performance. And if I can talk a little bit about that, one of the first things that I'll say is that this concept of bulk features or bulk mode is really the key to a lot of that performance, where we're grouping many features together and sort of treating them with the same operation across the features. It allows us to sort of manage that more efficiently for reading, writing, or processing. And so we've made some both general and specific improvements there. Let me give you just a couple quick examples. So in general, there are cases where we're either filtering features, or there's data sets that have a lot of string attributes, or when we're using group by in some transformers, or when we're just using a subset of attributes, like in a tester case where you're just using one, or a stats calculator where you're just calculating on a few stats, but not everything in the data set. We've seen some improvements. So when I say that it may run in 60% less time, that's more than twice as fast, right? Because 60% of the time isn't necessary anymore.
Yeah, that always confuses me. But
so if it took 10 seconds before, it will take 4 seconds now.
Absolutely, that's right.
Woo.
And so, that's the kind of timing that we're talking about. And again, these are more general cases that we made in the infrastructure, so many cases are potentially affected. But there were also specific cases as well. So like the feature writer, when using fan out, would run in 40% less time. And then a couple of real wins. If you have data sets that have few features but many attributes, they might run in 99% less time. That's basically 100 times faster than they were before. Wow. And as well, if you were creating bulk features when you had regular features, and they contained large geometries or blobs in attributes, using something like a cloner or an attribute keeper, again, we saw substantial improvements based on the changes that we made in the infrastructure to allow this to perform better. So there's really some fantastic stuff. This is my favorite combined scenario here. So if we read 29 million rows from CSV, filtering by a single attribute, and then calculating it grouped by, say, the median for the statistics, this is how it performed. The blue bar being runtime, so we want that to be lower, and the red bar being memory, how much it took on the machine to accomplish the translation, over releases since 2016 all the way up to 2022.0. And the good thing is that the blue bar goes down, the red bar kind of goes up, but then goes way down again. And so overall, we're 5 times faster than we were in FME 2021.2, and we're using 5% of the memory too. So I mean, this is a pretty radical change and a great example of how those improvements, when brought together, can make significant benefits for the user's runtime.
Mark, you're old enough to know the reference. I think it tastes great and it's less filling.
That's the idea.
I might be old enough, but I don't know that I do know that reference.
You're in the wrong country with that. That
was,
I think, a
continent.
Miller Lite ad from the 80s.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
You don't have Miller Lite in the UK?
I don't think we did in the 80s, no. I don't remember that.
The final thing I'll add is that, if you want some of this sweet performance, then one of the things we would upgrade, it's not always necessary. We try where possible to not have to upgrade transformers, but in some cases we have, because output order of the ports may change slightly, and in those cases we've versioned. And then also, watch for the link counts in Workbench. So if they're going by in hundreds of thousands at a time, then likely you're using bulk mode. And if they're not, and they're just counting one at a time very quickly, then likely those are features, just regular features. And we're trying more and more to preserve bulk features throughout the translation. But there are places where they do get split. And so if you see in the log file something that says splitting bulk features, then that would be an indication where there's a potential loss there. If you want to split them yourself, you can actually drop down the decelerator transformer and decelerate with 0 seconds, and it will also force the splitting of bulk features if you want to do your own performance testing.
I was pretty proud of that one, Ryan. I'm the guy that checked that one in. Well, I didn't check it in, but I did the work, and I think you checked it in for me. So the old guy did something. Hey, before we flip, I just wanted to mention as well, if you ever are in a situation where it has split on you, you can slap down an attribute keeper and then say make bulk mode, and you can recreate it, and it probably is worth doing. If there's even a few things afterwards, you're going to win.
Yeah, it's true. There are a few cases where you can sort of make bulk features from regular features. If you're in the middle of the workflow, an attribute keeper is the way to go. If you just want to start with them, a creator, if you use more than 2,000 features in a creator, will automatically create bulk features.
Is it 2,000?
It's now down to 2,000. It used to be 10,000.
See, that's inflation at work there, Ryan, or deflation. It used to be 10,000, and now
shrinkflation.
It's only 2,000.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It's easier and easier to create bulk features.
Well, I don't know if you saw this the other day, Ryan, but I created 2 quintillion features.
I did see that.
And it only took half a second, which I was just like, wow. And okay,
just because
well,
you can do something, Mark, doesn't mean you should.
You should, that's right. And then I put a sorter on the end, and it sort of really got quite bad after that, because 2 quintillion is like 21 zeros, I think, something like that.
I think the party will be over if you actually sort it.
Yes, I calculated it.
Sampler. I bet you could create a quintillion and then do a sampler of every quintillionth, and it would be pretty fast.
I tried that as well. I think it's just you don't really understand how many features are in a quintillion, because I calculated it would take 100,000 years to sort all of that. Actually, no, it would take 100,000 years at the rate it was going to just read the data before it even started to sort it. So it's. But
well,
anyway,
so the team still has something to work on, is what you're saying.
Yeah, basically,
it got a bit crazy. But
thankfully, we're not seeing those data volumes aside from maybe points in a point cloud. There could be a lot of those, but not that many attributes usually. People get a bit overwhelmed when you have thousands of attributes. So
yeah,
a lot of data.
No. Yeah, I was just trying to see what number the actual connection numbers went up to, and it turned out quite a lot. So
a lot.
Yeah.
So that's it for me, unless you guys have other specific questions.
No, I don't think I do. So FME 2022 is going to be faster and more. What's the word for it? International. Yes, I was going to say bilingual, but not really bilingual. Multilingual.
It's
multilingual.
Yes.
International program of mystery.
Yes, and I assume, because I noticed, and I'll just mention it, that the sign-ups for the FME World Tour open today, so you can go and sign up for that. And I noticed that the all the imagery and the pictures of everything are all racing cars. So I'm assuming that that's got something to do with the speed improvements. So,
yes. They're electric racing cars, Mark.
Yes. So, there we go.
Wow.
So
didn't even see that myself before.
Oh, there you are. So
good looking racing car.
Yeah. It is. So if anyone's watching in, you can just go and sign up for this now. And safe.com/World Tour.
Yeah.
Oh, and I guess the one final question that I've got, Dale, is when is this going to release? Are we still on target for?
You know, That's exactly the kind of thing I ask Ryan. And then he produces nice charts and graphs, and then he tells me. And so I think there's an excellent shot. Obviously, I mean, kind of for serious with the pandemic and, the advice of our medical officer that at any time we could expect about a third of our staff to be down. That is causing us to try to approach the release more cautiously than we usually do, especially if we start losing some testers at this state of the game. But Ryan, is it looking okay?
As far as I know, I think we're pretty on target. I don't know anything that's must ship that we, are completely blocked on. So there's still some things in progress in this late hour, but I think things are still looking fairly good.
It is. I mean, and I will share with the audience that kind of up where Don and I sit, we made the call to not be aggressive. Like usually in our youth, we would at this time of year say, "Oh, come on, Ryan, you can slide that one more thing in." And in this year, we're kind of shut it is what we're doing, and just letting that, because there will be another release since like June or July for that one or two things that I wish we could have done. They will arrive, and instead we're trying to really solidify things. Frankly, there's a lot of massive changes in FME 2022, the stuff Ryan is talking about today, actually. And so we think we've got our fill of changes with that and benefits. And well, there's just so many really interesting, cool things. One thing I'll just throw in, I think that this week, the Workspace Compare is in the betas. I don't know if it's in today or tomorrow, but it's making its debut. So if you have a couple workspaces around you want to compare, grab that beta and start comparing, and you can even merge. And so that's something that we're pretty excited about.
Yeah. Well, thanks, folks. And yeah, I've got a few more sneak peeks coming up. Next week, we'll be looking at the tiler, the dissolver, solid dissolver, and then after that, we'll look at the unfolded reader writer and the Esri reprojector. So yeah. And maybe we'll fit a few other things in there. Yeah. So,
Mark, is there an upcoming one about for developers about the SDK changes, or is that something we would mention now? Do you think?
I haven't got anything planned. I to be honest, I didn't know about that. So if there's something you want to discuss, then depends. If you want to do another session, we can do that, or if you want to carry on now. That's all good.
Maybe I'll just give you a couple sentences that if you are doing development against our SDKs, we haven't broken those SDKs in a couple of decades, but here we're making some intentional breaks, both around encoding, but also tidying up the usage of our SDKs, particularly our FME Objects SDK, but also the plugin SDK. So if there are those who are developing plugins and there are those who are using FME Objects to access the power of FME from within their applications, both of those cases are going to need to recompile against their applications against FME 2022.0 in order to leverage the sort of newest features. But hopefully we've made it easy, and there are guides and articles that exist up on our website. So I'll just refer you to there for now, but that's just something also to be aware of that comes along with some of the radical changes in FME 2022.0.
Fantastic. That's good to know. I didn't realize that, so I can share that info. Yeah. Well, again, thanks.
It shouldn't affect most users, right? It just will be if you're using the SDKs.
For sure. Yeah. Well, again, thanks for your time today, especially since we've gone way over what we'd originally considered. But I know once we get talking FME, it's very difficult to stop. So.
And we kind of did 2 for 1 there too, right?
We did. So so thanks again, and thanks to everyone who tuned in, and we'll get to see you. Tune in next week, and it will be. I'll try and get the time change right, so it's 1 p.m. Pacific time next week, not Central time. I messed that up today, but anyway.
Just for after lunch and a way to ease into the afternoon.
That's right. Yes. And if you're in Australia, you won't have to get up too early to watch it. So that was.
And if you're over in Europe, you can just have a little late night FMEing before you nod off.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'll say goodbye to everyone then. Thanks, folks.